This voiceover on the respiratory system includes slides from both the lecture and the lab. Starting with the nasal cavity, which extends from the external to the internal nares, we will see three types of epithelia: non-keratinized stratified squamous epithelium at the beginning of the nasal cavity, a small patch of olfactory epithelium lining the roof of the nasal cavity, and the rest of the nasal cavity is lined by a respiratory epithelium, which is a pseudostratified ciliated with many goblet cells. The nasal cavity receives the tear-containing nasolacrimal ducts as well as mucus from the paranasal sinuses. The floor of the nasal cavity is formed by the hard palate. Three parts to the pharynx: nasopharynx, the superior portion lined with respiratory epithelium and contains the pharyngeal tonsils or the adenoids, as well as the opening of the eustachian tube. Oropharynx contains the palatine and lingual tonsils, and it is an air and food passage, as is the inferiormost laryngopharynx that is also lined by a stratified squamous epithelium. The larynx voice box is situated between the hyoid bone and the trachea, and it has various cartilages, notably the largest thyroid with its Adam's apple or laryngeal prominence, cricoid cartilage, epiglottis. Between these cartilages and the first tracheal cartilage are CTP membranes or ligaments, thyrohyoid, cricothyroid, and cricotracheal from superior to inferior. The two smaller paired cartilages are visible in this slide. Those would be the corniculates and the arytenoids. In this photograph of a model, you will see inferior to the larynx and the trachea that we have already discussed would be the respiratory tree, starting with the primary bronchi, one per lung. Those branch into secondary bronchi, two in the left lung, three in the right lung, and finally the tertiary bronchi, approximately 10 of these per lung. Tertiaries continue to divide or branch into smaller fourth order, fifth order, and so forth until we reach the level of the gas exchange alveoli. This is a photo of a plastic model of the lungs indicating the cardiac notch in the left lung and the various fissures or indentations. The left lung has one oblique fissure and two lobes. The right lung has a horizontal and an oblique fissure, which separates it into three lobes. This diagrammatic again shows the fissures and the lobes. Also, the breakdown of the bronchial or respiratory tree from primary to secondary to tertiary. Tertiary bronchi form bronchopulmonary segments, about 10 per lung. Each is one tertiary bronchus plus the supplied lung tissue, all enclosed in a CTP partition. At the end of the conducting zone, which has no alveoli and terminates as the terminal bronchioles, we have the beginning of the respiratory zone, which contains alveoli for gas exchange. The first component of the respiratory zone would be in the form of respiratory bronchioles, which ultimately lead to individual alveoli. Each alveolus contains three types of cells, including first type 1 cells that form that simple squamous epithelium that forms the bulk of the alveoli. Type 2 cells secrete surfactant, a chemical that decreases surface tension to prevent the alveoli from collapsing. And finally, alveolar macrophages or dust cells, which are mobile phagocytic cells.